Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues. Joining from across the regions in different locations. I hope you can hear me loud and clearly. And welcome to today's webinar. And today's webinar is on anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism. In short, AML, CFT. And we're going to be discussing these requirements for the Adaptation Fund accreditation and reaccreditation processes. So to those who I haven't met or who haven't met me yet, my name is Farai Madziwa, and I coordinate the readiness program for the Adaptation Fund. This session is designed to provide clear, practical guidance on AML/CFT and expectations within the fund's accreditation framework. And we are hoping that from this discussion, we can support implementing entities to strengthen their institutional systems to meet these requirements with more confidence. So today's agenda will cover the accreditation process and standards, and we have my colleague Sylvia Mancini, who leads the Countries and Partnerships Unit of the Adaptation Fund, who will walk us through those standards and processes. But we also have our accreditation panel members who will get into a little bit more depth on AML and CFT requirements for accreditation and reaccreditation. And that basically will cover the discussion. Before we delve in, just a few housekeeping notes for everyone to keep in mind. So for starters, please do keep your microphones muted throughout the session so that we minimize the background noise. And if you do need to take the floor or provide input or contribute to the discussion, you are welcome to use the chat function on the app. And also you can type in your questions on that chat at any time, and we'll be able to address them during Q&A, but we'll also give you the floor if you click the hand icon to raise your hand during the Q&A. You can then unmute yourself, and please feel free to turn on your video as well, and we will give you the floor. Please note that this webinar is being recorded, and we will make the recording available to participants after the session and after the webinar. We also do have interpretation available in French and Spanish. So you may select your preferred language using the interpretation icon, which is the little globe on the bottom left-hand corner, and you can select the language of preference. For those joining us today, please also note that this session will be repeated tomorrow at 9:30 p.m. Washington, D.C. time. And this will be to cater to participants in the Asia Pacific region who are on a different geographic timeline. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to invite Mikko Ollikainen, who's head of the Adaptation Fund, to deliver remarks. So Mikko, over to you. And I think, Jinyan, you can probably help us muting. There are some participants who I think have not muted. So over to you, Mikko.
Thank you, Farai. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and very warm welcome also from me to all of you joining us today for this webinar on anti-money laundering and countering the finance of terrorism. As the head of the Adaptation Fund, I would like to begin by thanking all the accredited entities as well as applicant entities currently undergoing accreditation, for your continued engagement with the Adaptation Fund. Your participation in the accreditation process is central to our shared objective of strengthening direct access and country ownership in the delivery of adaptation finance. Accreditation is, of course, a gateway to accessing resources, but it's also much more than that. It's a means for institutions to build and demonstrate lasting credibility by showing that they have robust governance arrangements, strong fiduciary systems, and the capacity to manage public financial resources responsibly throughout the project cycle. In that sense, accreditation is as much about institutional strengthening as it is about access to finance. The Adaptation Fund's accreditation framework is therefore designed not as a gatekeeping exercise, but as a capacity building pathway. It supports institutions in progressively strengthening internal controls, accountability mechanisms, and risk management frameworks over time. The fiduciary standards embedded in this framework, including those related to integrity and financial safeguards, are intended to serve the interests of implementing entities themselves and not only those of the fund. We continue to see strong and growing demand for accreditation, reflecting the increased urgency of adaptation needs globally and the value placed on the fund's standards. Today, there are 97 accreditation or reaccreditation applications in our pipeline, including 42 under review, 14 under screening, and 41 pending submissions. To date, the fund has accredited 62 entities, which includes national, regional, and multilateral, and that illustrates both the reach and diversity of the accreditation framework. This growth is taking place against a challenging global backdrop at the moment. As adaptation financing needs expand and as the external environment becomes more complex and uncertain, climate finance is under greater scrutiny than ever. In times of fiscal constraint and heightened risk awareness, as now, confidence in the integrity of financial flows is essential. Implementing entities play a central role in maintaining that confidence across the climate finance architecture. It's in this context that AML CFT requirements should be viewed. They are not simply externally imposed conditions or technical compliance exercises. Strong AML CFT frameworks help implementing entities protect themselves by managing financial and reputational risks, by overseeing executing entities, responding appropriately to allegations, and ensuring that resources are used for their intended purposes. They also position institutions to operate confidently as portfolios grow and as engagement with a wider range of partners and funding sources expands over time. We are aware that many applicant entities have sought clarity on AML CFT expectations and how they are assessed within the Adaptation Fund's accreditation process, and on how best to demonstrate the required institutional capacities. This webinar today has been organized precisely to address those questions. The accreditation panel will provide a practical and technical overview of what AML CFT compliance means in the context of accreditation and reaccreditation, what are some of the common gaps that are observed, and how entities can strengthen the evidence base in their applications. I would like to conclude by thanking the accreditation panel for providing their technical leadership today, and by encouraging all participants to engage actively, ask questions, and use this opportunity really to not only support your accreditation processes, but also to strengthen institutional systems that will serve you well beyond this cycle. Thank you, and I wish you a very productive and informative discussion.
Thank you very much, Miko, for those remarks. And we will now move on to our first speaker for the webinar, and I'll call upon Silvia Mancini, who will give us an overview of the Adaptation Fund accreditation process and standards. Also, just to flag that Miko will stay for a little bit with us. We know he's got a busy schedule, but he'll be available after Sylvia's presentation in case you have questions directed at him on the high-level institutional arrangements and any questions that you may have. But for now, Sylvia, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Farai, and good morning, good afternoon to all. This is an absolute pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to have the accreditation panel members with us as technical leaders in this field. My name is Silvia Mancini. I am the lead of the Country and Partnership Unit, and I'm here to go through the first few slides in terms on have some lights on the accreditation process. And the quick framing as just continuing to what Miko was mentioning, accreditation is about ensuring entities can safely and effectively manage adaptation fund resources. Accreditation is valid for 5 years, and it's a country-driven process, and this is extremely important. The parties to the accreditations are the designated authority, the applicants, the secretariat, the accreditation panel, and the adaptation fund board. The nomination routes differ by entity type. National implementing entities are nominated by the designated authority. Regional implementing entities needs letter of support from at least 2 countries where they operate, and multilateral implementing entities are invited by the board. You can view the main step in these slides, but of course, AML CFT documentation is part of the completeness check, and design and effectiveness are assessed during the review stage. These are the accreditation modalities. We have regular accreditation that is available to entities of all types, size, and risk profiles. Then we have the streamlined accreditation process, and we are very pleased to say that the board at the last board meeting accredited also an additional entity that went through the streamlined accreditation process, making 6 entities accredited under this process. And this is designed to support small entities access the adaptation fund resources, typically available for applicants that have a staff up to 25 members engaged in projects and that have annual administrative expenses up to $1 million. Then we have the fast track accreditation available to all applicants' entities accredited by the GCF within a period of 4 years prior to submission of the accreditation to the adaptation fund. The regular accreditation and fast track reaccreditation, as I said, the accreditation is valid for 5 years, and then entities will need to apply for reaccreditation. And this reaccreditation process allows an entity to renew its accreditation status either through the regular reaccreditation or fast track reaccreditation modality. Reaccreditation is not automatic as organizations evolve over the span of 5 years, and applicants will have to explain what has changed since the last accreditation and how systems and controls are sustained. So the same fiduciary logic applies, including AML CFT consideration. The board is currently reconsidering the reaccreditation process, and in its last decision of 46/9 has requested the Secretariat in consultation with the board to prepare for the board consideration at its 47th meeting a revised operationalization proposal, and has also granted an extension of accreditation to all implementing entities accredited by the fund and entities that are currently under panel review for reaccreditation or due for reaccreditation until 31st of October 2027. Accreditation is not a one-time compliance exercise. It is a continuous mechanism that underpins trust, transparency, and effective delivery of adaptation finance. So the process is independent, systematic, country-driven, and evidence-based. And what I mean by independent is the accreditation panel is an independent body of the fund. And AML CFT supports this purpose by strengthening institution reliability. As mentioned by Miko, we have 62 accredited implementing entities to date. There is a strong presence, as you can see, of a national implementing entities. This is a fund, just to remind us, that has pioneered direct access. So the importance of direct access for this, I hear some voice. You can, thank you. There is a strong presence, as I said, of national implementing entities, and also including from LDCs and SITs. This is extremely important. And a larger share of entities has already gone through the reaccreditation. And this shows that accreditation is a living system and it's not a static system. Accreditation rests on 4 pillars. There is the legal status, the financial and management integrity, the institutional capacity, the transparency, anti-corruption, and the accountability. And the AML CFT is cross-cutting, not a standalone requirement, and it reinforces financial integrity, governance, and accountability across all pillars. The panel experience has shown recurring gaps and misunderstanding in AML CFT submissions. And so it was the panel itself that has requested clearer applicant-friendly guidance. And when this webinar and the webinar that we're gonna have tomorrow for Asian countries responds to that need, because it clarifies expectations and supports consistent interpretation. And mostly, and this is extremely important for us here at the Secretariat to express, creates space for dialogue and learning. So thank you, and I'll pass back to Farai to continue with this important webinar.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Maybe before we get into the more detailed discussion on AML CFT requirements, if we can pause for a little bit just to allow for some questions. If there are any overall process related questions on accreditation, reaccreditation, or any questions for Miko, please feel free to click the hand icon so we can give you the floor. Alternatively, you can also type in your question in the chat. And currently, I don't see any question that has been posted on the chat. Just checking to see if anybody has raised their hand on the chat. Okay. Well, right now, I'm not seeing anybody raising a question. I do not see any hand raised. And Ishani, please feel free to let me know if I'm missing anything. But since I don't see any, we can move ahead. And if a question pops up, please type it in the chat, or you can raise your hand in the next Q&A. So I'd like to call upon Carlo Bogini. He is one of our accreditation panel members, and he will kick us off with a discussion on unpacking AML CFT requirements under the fund. So Carlo, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Farai. Thank you. Good afternoon, at least for me. Good morning for the others. For this opportunity, I'm representing here the panel together with David and John, and I think they will intervene later on, and also they can intervene during my presentation if I miss to mention something. While I am speaking, I will try to share also my screen so that, because I understood that we need to be able to, yeah, I think, I hope you can see my screen. Thank you, Sylvia. But before starting with the presentation, that is a guidance presentation. I would like to be extremely clear because there is a board decision that is board decision B3236 of October 2018 that define clearly which are the obligations that we have in the context of the AML CFT. The board of the fund already looked in the elements of the policy related to AML CFT since 2012. But the decision was really clarifying, as Silvia and Nico explained before, the relevance of AML CFT in the context of the overall institutional capacity of the implementing entities. And the board decision makes reference to three key elements that are part of the assessment that the accreditation panel is performing in relation to AML CFT, and in particular modify the document to be submitted in this respect. The first one is about the internal control framework, and in particular, clearly policy and procedures, screening system, risk, and so on and so on. The second element is procurement. That is quite a key component in dealing with counterparts. And the third element is about policies and framework to deal with financial mismanagement. And these are, I would say, the three cross-cutting elements of the AML CFT that are included in the board decision. So to go already in the context, I would like also to make a bit of disclaimer to mention the fact that how AML CFT is implemented in an organization depends on the type of organization. There are organizations like national development banks that have obligations that are determined by the central banks or by the governments. Others, they don't have the same obligations. The type of national legislation, because it is strictly linked to legal aspects. So there is a key elements to which we need to pay attention. The third one is the dimension of the organization. Mikko was extremely clear talking about internal control and management system. Each organization setup may have different type of implication. So when you read, you will look also the guidance material afterwards. You need to interpret in the context of the type of organization you are part of or you are submitting for accreditation. And finally, as Silvia mentioned, and also Nico mentioned, accreditation is not a moment, it's a continuous process because it should help each organization to develop and to reinforce their internal control mechanism and management mechanism. So it's really, AML CFT is a part of the overall internal control and management framework that is underpinning the entities applying for accreditation or reaccreditation and so on and so on. So now going more in detail, I would say, as you know, the panel is looking at the accreditation process through the commitment, capacity, and compliance, the famous 3C. What does it mean? When we talk about commitment, we are talking about organizational leadership. For example, the zero tolerance policies and board management decision. These are the commitment we link to the AML CFT. In terms of capacity, mean that the organization has system, processes, and procedures in place, but also the personnel to perform the work, the technology, different type of ways, depending on the dimension and structure of the organization, the staff capacity and expertise to deal with AML CFT, the oversight mechanism, because to ensure the independent approach and independent oversight of it could be audit compliance, depending on the structure of the functions, sometimes the legislation. And the third element is the compliance, meaning the operational effectiveness of all these. So you have the governance decided, the commitment towards AML CFT, you have established the necessary capacity, and third element, you need to be able to demonstrate that this is operational or is the process to become operational. And this can clearly come from evidence of actual implementation, so screenshot, evidence of workflows, evidence of training that took place, track record, and also maybe audit reports or reports that are given to the board about all these, how it's implemented. And now, starting from this overall approach, we go more a bit in detail on the different slides. I will try to summarize it because the slides will be shared afterwards. First of all, which type of documents we are requiring? This is guidance, so please don't read it as mandatory. It's something that you may have in different type of shape and form, okay? First of all, normally, the best will be to have an AML CFT policy approved by the board or the highest entity. It can take different type of forms, but fundamentally is providing the authority of implementing AML CFT inside the organization. In this respect, as I said, you need to have a governance structure in place. So if you have the policy, you need to have a governance structure in place. So having a organization chart to identify the responsibility, for example, the compliance officer position or some other position, the responsibility for the audit committee, the responsibility for the governing board, maybe also minutes of the governing board that shows that AML CFT has been discussed once a year, X times a year, depending on the core activities. The internal control framework. The internal control framework is normally the full set of policy and procedure, tool, system, and people that together work in order to achieve the necessary reliability of the functioning of the organization. It's the system that provides confidence on the fact that we have reasonable assurance the resources will be handed where they should be respected. So having the internal control framework would make reference to the AML CFT, and is operationalized is another key element that we consider. Specific policy, and this depends on the type of activity you do, but for example, having contracts or the selection procedure, disbursement and payments that are key fundamental components in the AML CFT, know your clients and so on, that are all integral part, are also key elements we are looking at to ascertain the reliability of your system. Financial mismanagement framework is when things are going wrong, so how we are able to deal with the problem coming up. So which are the investigation procedure, are internal, are external, are provided by whom, who is the responsibility, how we ensure the correct oversight and independence. Are there ethics or disciplinary code that are defined? And last one, but key element in especially small organization, starting with is the whistleblower protection. How we can ensure that people can come forward with the honest expectation that they will be protected if they bring forward issues that have been detected, wrongdoings, financial mismanagement, generally speaking. Key, know your customer identification, how these procedures are integrated in the systems that you are running for your financial system, for your budget system, for your procurement system, and your contracting system. Which type of screening procedure you use, for example, UN or other international nation organizations, sanction lists and sources, but also maybe private providers or some other solution. In terms of evidence, also showing which type of screening you have done, can be a screenshot, can be a sample of KYC forms that are clearly we expect sanitized because we understand they contain private information that do not need to be disclosed. In some cases, it can be also politically exposed person. If your country, your legislation provide for it, how this will dealt by is not part of our key requirement, but in some context, it can be expected. Training documentation is fundamental because if you want to operationalize the AML CFT, you need to be sure your staff understand what it is about and how they need to behave. And this starts from there. If you are able to bring and impregnate the concept at the operational level, clearly this will grow up. And finally, audit and oversight, because the objective is to ensure that your organization self-protects itself from any type of wrongdoing with the reasonable assurance that if something happens, it's duly managed, it's followed up, and there are also the necessary measures implemented from this point of view. So these are the type of documents that we are looking. And as I said, you don't need to read them as these are the mandatory documents you are looking. If you don't have a policy in place, because, for example, in your country, it's not foreseen that you have an AML CFT policy, well, how you are addressing to ensure that you have a proper know your customer process in place, how you are ensuring that the disbursement are following certain process. And it's not sufficient, for example, to say, well, I know that my bank, in any case, our banking system are doing this. This is partially sufficient because in any case, the responsibility on the disbursement of funds, on the use of funds, on the selection of vendors, also on the recipient of funds from any type of donors is and remain in your responsibility. So you need to be able to take, you are accountable to this towards the funds, and we need to be sure that in the process of accreditation, we are able to ascertain your understanding of the AML CFT. So the documentation that we consider can be required is really for you to assess what you have compared to the final objective that the board of the adaptation fund has decided. I repeat, is a focus on the internal control framework, is focused on the procurement procedures, and is focused on policies and framework to deal with financial mismanagement. So the system you put in place should provide this type of assurance in the accreditation process. Now, going a bit more in detail, so in a cascading process, we are going to the 3 C's, and we are going first of all to the commitment pillar. What we are looking for as evidence of the commitment pillar. Clearly, we start from the tone at the top. We are talking about leadership commitment towards the AML CFT, and this can take a different type of form, board decision, CEO signature, leadership signature, or maybe in some organization, because there are public organizations linked to the ministry, it can be a government decision that has been taken that covers as an umbrella everything. The organizational integration. So we need to be sure that AML CFT, as Mikko has explained clearly, as well as all the other fiduciary aspects requested by the fund, is not something requested by the fund. It's something that the organization embeds in its way of working. And clearly, it touched the procurement policy and the code of conduct. Code of conduct wants to establish the values that the organization will bring forward. And finally, you need to evidence necessary resources. We know perfectly that if you have a perfect policy, a perfect leadership decision, but at the end, there is nobody or a minor part of the resources involved, there is a risk that is increasing. And it's a question of risk. At the end, it's a question of risk. So it's a question of how you measure the risk, and it's part of the overall risk management approach of the organization. So it's really important to ensure that the resources are properly allocated, taking into account the risk, and knowing that if you don't have the sufficient resources, most probably you are more exposed to the risk, and most probably you need to look at how to address the risk in the long term. What may weaken the commitment? Well, clearly, if you don't have policy, or the policy is there, but at the end remain a piece of paper. Is dealt by the checkbox, or there is no oversight. And you have here also some example of possible questions from the panel. So don't be surprised if you are going to this, because the type of question we are asking fundamentally are coming from us having not understood completely your system, or your system not being clarified to us sufficiently. So we need to dig in to understand what does it mean. So that's the objective. So when, for example, sometime we need to go back and to understand, okay, you don't have this system, you don't have these processes, but what is at national level? Because maybe the national level has established this type of things. Maybe the financial institution system has already put in place a series of provision that you need to follow up. So that's the type of question we may ask. Now we go to the second C, that is about the capacity pillar. Capacity pillar means to have the tools, system, generally speaking, and people to deliver it. System technology can be an automated system fully linked to and integrated with your ERP, or the full, let's say, system that manages your financing, but also HR, maybe also grants, and especially the payment and disbursement systems, including with audit trail. Yeah, you can also use Excel. In my personal experience, I took over a project of the European Union, certain period of time, was 2.1 billion euros. And we started with Excel to make accounting for 3 years because we were not able to have on time our accounting system. It was tough. It required a lot of attention, but we had for 3 years a clean audit opinion and continued also afterwards. So there are different types of possibility and you need to adapt, but that's what it's talking about. Second is human resources and expertise. People make the difference. There is nothing to do in all organizations. And how you train your people, how you ensure that your people are competent and you have the correct expertise inside, or you acquire from outside and you bring inside, is an essential component of the success story of implementing the AML CFT, as well all the other elements of the internal control management system. Procedure integration, you need to ensure that your process and procedure are integrated. It should not be an overhead. It should not be something that you do sometime. It should be fully integrated. The approach in your staff process to onboard new customer or onboard new donors is that I need to know them. I need to have the information about who they are, where they come, the resources, and be sure that I have an audit trail and the necessary record keeping about it. Because in this way, I protected my organization. And this is what we want, to be sure that you are capable at any moment to demonstrate we have done the reasonable assurance. We have the reasonable assurance we have done the best in this success story. Also here, what can put at risk this capacity? Clearly, as I said before, doing things manually and using Excel or other type of spreadsheet of all type is maybe weaker than having an integrated system, but it can be compensated. You will put a person doing the job as person supervising it, may have the same success story, a fully integrated system. This is not a question, but you need to ensure that you have an understanding of the risk and how you manage the risk in relation to AML CFT. It's a quite complex matter, so it's much more complex than doing bookkeeping, for example. Not updating sectional lists, so reference to all sectional lists, or having staff that have never been properly trained about AML CFT, because being a technical element require certain expertise to be brought forward from inside, from outside, in different combinations. Many governments have institutionalized at governmental level, Ministerial of Finance level, of central bank, a lot of trainings that are offered exactly to facilitate the integration. The compliance, the first thing. What does it mean? What we are looking for in the context of compliance? Well, operational implementation of the policies. What does it mean? Well, for example, seeing in the minutes of the board that they have examined AML CFT, they took note of which are the plus and minus, maybe from the report of the external audit or the compliance officer, or it can be also the audit committee doing these type of things. It can be any other type of board in charge of ethics and integrity, depending how you set up your organization. Looking at KYC file, so receiving example of KYC file, know your client, your customer file, including maybe different type of verifications that can take place. Sample of transaction, showing screenshot on the type of controls that are performed before any payment. As I said, some entities are relying on the banking system. The banking system has strict rules about how to deal with AML CFT. This is not sufficient. You need to be able to explain how you and as organization are dealing with it. Monitoring evidence, so having, for example, a report, compliance report, dashboards, these type of elements. That it can be also, once again, a Word report saying, well, these are the cases we have dealt by, we didn't detect anything, but that goes to the correct level of accountability. Maybe not necessarily to the CEO, but maybe to the Deputy Director General in charge of the administration, or something, or the compliance officer, or the legal office, or the board secretary, depending on how is your setup inside the organization. And your operational effectiveness also is really important in assessing how the system is implementing, how, especially when you detect any type of positive match in the sanction list, who is taking the decision, how you move on to ensure that if there is a positive match at a certain point in time, there is the necessary responsibility to take a decision with the correct principle, starting from the two pair of eyes. In terms of risk, because at the end, AML CFT can be a major risk for the organization, AML CFT should be integrated in the institutional risk assessment. And we expect that this is done, as most of the organizations are doing for their own business, at annual level, in which you assess also the risk profile, taking into account maybe input coming from governmental level, coming from other international organizations, coming from your own national institutions, maybe from peers, understand which are the mitigation procedures that can be put in place. Do you need to enhance your due diligence because the risk scenario in front of you are increasing due to particular situation? For example, a worsening of the economic situation in the country may expose the country to higher risk, or any type of geopolitical situation, scarcity of food or energy, and so on and so on. And finally, in the context of the risk is also how we deal with non-compliance. How we ensure that the investigation procedure are properly put in place once the violations are identified, especially in small organizations. I don't want to define a small, medium organization, but clearly when you have a small, medium organization, you need to ensure the confidentiality, the necessary independence, the necessary protection of this whistleblower in case of investigation. So in some cases, you may avail yourself of external support of a specialist doing these type of things. But after it comes back to the organization, to the leadership of the organization to decide how to address the issue, and including maybe enforcing some corrective actions towards the people who are involved on this. And the most important element at the end, because you may have an incident, but the most important element is which are the lessons that you can learn for preventing for the future, analyzing and preventing for the future, the occurrence repeating itself. So once again, what may weaken the compliance from our perspective is the one-size-fits-all approach. So I take a book, and I develop one system that is not fit for my organization. It doesn't match the organization because it's a system requiring having SAP, I don't know, or maybe having 20 people in compliance, and my organization is 30 people. So it will never work out. Ignoring the violation. This is a quite tricky question. It's meaning that we are not in a gray area. We need to be in a black and white area. So you need to take a position and ensure that violations are assessed, whatever it is, and consequences are put in place, including deciding that there is no need for any consequences because there was some misunderstanding, whatever it is. But it's fundamental that there is awareness in the organization. No enforcement of policies is worse than not having a policy to a certain extent, because you decide to follow a policy that fundamentally is ignored, exposing your organization to major risk from different type of issues. I said, this AML CFT, in all this as a component that is a managerial component inside the organization, but is institutional, is legal, as data privacy component, it might become penal and judicial. So it's quite a critical element in which you need to be quite careful on how you approach it, but at the same time, it will reinforce all in all your internal control and management structure. So maybe some do's, it's a bit of basic things, but we are looking for evidence-based, so we are really looking to evidence. Sometimes also we are looking ourselves at evidence, looking from information that are available also, as you know, on the web. We need to be realistic. If a policy is not there, it's not there. But how you address it, how you ensure that you provide the same, I would say, reasonable assurance to us about the the use of funds, this will be a key element in the process. Be organized. So once you provide documents, be sure that there is a consistent logic in the documents. You facilitate enormously the work when we are cross-checking the documents. If you want to also include checklists, it's not needed. These are suggestions. Make it easier, but at the end, it's up to you to see how you want to present your file in this respect. What I think, let's talk about don'ts in the sense that what we are here really to support your accreditation process. We are independent. We want to be sure that we provide the board with a recommendation for accreditation that is professionally assessed in line with the adaptation fund board decision and adaptation fund accreditation process. So that's what we are trying to do. And our cleaning of your process and procedure is only this objective. And I've been dealing with, and as the colleague, with many big organizations. And once a big organization, they told me, but why you are asking this? We are, we are. I said, yeah, I know absolutely that you are, and I know absolutely that you have all the elements, but unfortunately, I need to provide this information on evidence-based information to the board for their decision. It's not me. I have to provide it. So please help me to finalize it. More you are specific, better it is for us because we have a better understanding. We also advise you not to delay too much the submission. I know that these processes are complex also for us, from our side. I can say once we have the answer submitted earlier, we are using a first in, first out approach often. So the first who answer the question is treated immediately, and maybe the other need to wait because the question came later on. So we suggest always to, and also for us it's easier to follow the logic of the flow information. And last one is don't assume we know. We may know, but as I said, we are evidence-based. We need to go through the 3 C's: commitment, capacity, compliance, build upon the evidence that you provide to us about how you are set up, in this case, the AML CFT. But fundamentally, you can use the same guidance material for all the other criteria with the same type of logic. And if you have any question, we are there, as I said, to support you. So the adaptation fund secretary is your counterpart, first counterpart. And if there are any question, they will submit the question to us, and we can provide the answer that are needed. So I will stop here because I took already a bit more time than I expected. But I hope I provided a overall understanding on how we are looking from the accreditation point of view, the accreditation panel, the AML CFT, the type of commitment, capacity, compliance assessment we are doing, and which are the elements included in there, and in a cascading approach, how you can build up your files. As I said, especially for AML CFT, but the model, the logic can be applied to all the criteria, the fiduciary criteria that are established in the board decision of the adaptation fund. I stop here. I think the presentation will be disclosed afterwards if it's not been already done. And I stop sharing my screen. I give you back the floor. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlo, for that comprehensive presentation covering commitment, capacity, and compliance, where it concerns accreditation and AML CFT. Now, we have a couple of questions, but may I also encourage the accreditation team to respond to the chat? I mean, we have a little over 30 minutes left, and we still have 2 presentations. We might not be able to cover all of the questions verbally. So please, we have our accreditation team on hand. Do respond to some of those questions in the chat. Let me cover maybe the few important questions, which I think would be beneficial for all participants to hear, even though they would also have been responded to in the chat. I think there are about 3 or 4 that I will ask the accreditation team, maybe Sylvia, to respond to. The first 2 are with regards to the actual process of accreditation. So the question is, who initiates accreditation? And I know we have a process, but it might be beneficial to probably explain in practical terms, how it actually happens that accreditation starts, and in that same breath, who initiates reaccreditation at the time that reaccreditation is due. There is a question also regarding, the fast track accreditation between Adaptation Fund and GCF. There is a question whether fast track applies to other agencies or organizations or entities that have accreditation with other entities or organizations outside of GCF and AF. So for example, would it be applicable to the EU, INTPA, or say you have accreditation with EBRD? Is it applicable to be fast-tracked to the Adaptation Fund? And I think the last two, which are also kind of critical, and then Carlo will get into the detail also after Sylvia has responded. There are particular questions for you. There are two other questions maybe directed at Sylvia. What is the difference between regular and fast-track accreditation? In terms of the specifics, I think the question is referring to what are the specific elements that are not required or that are not assessed during fast-track accreditation. And the last one would be whether the Adaptation Fund has undertaken a gap analysis for NIEs being fast-tracked, and whether this gap analysis, I think the question is more asking about the common gaps that this gap analysis would have brought into light, whether there's such an analysis that's been done. So we'll stop here for now and give the floor to maybe Sylvia, and then we'll get to the other questions addressed to Carlo.
Thank you, Farai. Thank you, Carlo, for the very good presentation. I have responded to some of the questions on the chat, so that you can always have a reference to the steps of the accreditation process and who initiates and what are the differences between a fast-track accreditation and a regular accreditation, and the same is valuable for the reaccreditation, given the work that now the board is doing with regard to the continuum accreditation. Now, in terms of, I have not responded to one question in the chat, which is about the accessibility of the type of entity that can access an accreditation process. And there is a specific question about an NGO. So can NGOs apply for accreditation? So the answer is yes. NGOs can apply for accreditation, and this responds to also in terms of the steps for the NGO will be exactly the same as for others. It will be the designated authority that currently is no longer a person, but is an office, the designated authority at country level to endorse an NGO to start an accreditation process for the Adaptation Fund on behalf of the country. We have a case for a faith-based organization, CASMO Honduras, that tells you how much, in terms of those 62 entities that have been accredited, there are different typologies of entities. It spans from NGOs, national banks, ministries of finance or Ministry of Agriculture, and so on. Now, in terms of the gaps, I will respond again in the chat. We have, this is a fund that has been doing direct access for the longest. So there has been a lot of lesson learned that we have captured. There have been studies, and I will make sure that in the chat you have reference to the gap analysis and to the gaps that the accreditation panel founds in the processes. So I'll stop here. I'll continue in the chat so that we can continue with the webinar. Thank you for these important questions.
Thank you, Sylvia. There are a couple of questions in the chat also, I think addressed to Carlo, but please feel free to also, if you want to take the floor, to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, and we will give you the floor to speak. I think in terms of, there's a specific question to Carlo. So the question is the expectation that the entity should align its existing funds with these policies that you were referring to demonstrate commitment? And additionally, regarding the staffing structure, is it required that the relevant positions are already filled out? Or would it be sufficient to show that these roles will be filled once accreditation is approved? There are a bunch of other questions. Is it okay for the AML compliance officer of the firm to also be the individual who manages the finance and procurement process? That is the second question. And how can smaller organizations best tailor their AML CFT systems to their size and resources whilst meeting the fund's accreditation standards? The last question I have is a little bit more specific by Christiane. I'm wondering, because it's a bit long, Christiane, do you want to take the floor and probably very briefly summarize what you're asking? Would that be okay? Sorry.
Okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hello. Okay. Our organization, I'm from Brazil, Institute Society Population Nature. We have approved risk management policy. It's not specific to AML CFT, but address the topic. And we already submit all documents in the adaptation fund platform. So my doubt is if I should wait for feedback for the documents, because we don't have a specific policy from AML, but you have the code of ethics and also internal guidelines that cover the subject. I need to wait, or I need to develop or building a specific policy?
Thank you, Christiane. I didn't mean to cut you off. Thank you. Carlo, over to you. Carlos.
Thank you. Sorry, I was unmuting. I will try. I also invite David and John if they want to add something to what I say, because, as I said, is the panel approach. Yeah, so the expectation is that you have in place the people, system, process, and procedure to be able to answer the AML CFT requirement of the fund coming from the board. Clearly, as also Silvia and Nico before mentioned, is a process. So yes, we expect to be that we would expect that everything is in order, but in the sense that the positions are filled in and approved. But it can happen that in organization evolution, maybe a position is vacant because the person left. So it's not this is a blockage point in the accreditation process. We need to see that there is a commitment for the recruitment process. The job description is there. The person was there, or the person has been put in place. Clearly, for us, it's a question of assessing the overall risk and coming to the conclusion that what you are doing and what you are explaining us you will be doing provide the confidence that will ensure that the fund's money will be spent in accordance with sound financial management. Now, the role of procurement officer and compliance officer, we saw cases in which the compliance officer perform other tasks. Clearly, we need to be sure that there is a borderline that is quite difficult to assess. Only answering yes can be the same person or not. This has to be assessed case by case and considering the type of organization you have. For example, how many people are working in this office of the procurement person? Is alone, so he's doing all the job, or maybe is head of a structure in which you have 2-3 people doing different type of roles and provide this necessary independence and setup. Small organization, as I said, small organization is clearly they need to be sure that they look at the guidance material, look at the board decision, and consider how they can adapt it, their organization, to be able to achieve it. And this will require clearly maybe that we have different type of roles and person doing different type of activities, while I would say key principle like the 4 pair of eyes or independence of internal audit, external audit, management, these are key principles that need to be complied with. But yes, the key element is that once you are applying for the accreditation, this will require that you assess how your organization is capable to achieve the accreditation. And we have organizations that have been going through with 20 people, 25 people without any problem, because they did this type of exercise and they structured themselves in a way to perform their core business, ensuring sound financial management, generally speaking, and ensuring AML CFT. On Brazil, maybe, I don't know, David, you would like to intervene on Brazil, or was something else? Because otherwise...
So thank you very much, Carlos. But maybe what I would suggest, David, you can take the floor, but perhaps for the purpose of this webinar, we might not be getting into individual specific cases, but just keep the discussion a bit general. And of course, the Secretariat is open to discussing bilaterally specific details pertaining to a specific entity or specific country, if that helps. But David, over to you, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we hear you.
Okay. Perhaps I can just make a general comment in terms of when we are looking at an application, we try very much to understand the nature of the entity that has applied and the context in which it's operating. So, for example, I think there are some questions about, can a government unit apply, or an NGO? And once we understand the nature of the entity, for example, a government ministry, then a government ministry is governed by the policies and procedures within government and the practices within government. So, for example, government may have an AML CFT law that needs to be followed. It may have other entities within government that monitor how that law is being followed and how compliance is being effected and so on. And that is okay with us, because the principles, the AML principles that were mentioned by Carlo, can still be covered if the entity is part of the government or part of a bigger organization. If it's a very small entity, again, we try to very much to understand that context and to see what arrangements the organization has made to meet those principles. Or if it's, for example, I think there was a question from...
There is Hadija, myself, Francis.
Who is calling me Mudaya? Who is calling me Mudaya?
Hello?
I don't know.
Hello?
Who is Charlie Jr.?
There are people talking in the background.
Yeah, my side. Benedict, would you mind muting your microphone? Thank you. Go ahead, please, David.
Okay. And the question that was asked, I think, on a risk management policy, if the policy covers well the aspects that Carlo mentioned to do with AML CFT, if it covers those well, then of course we'll look at it, we'll consider it. Although generally most entities have a different AML CFT policy. And I think there was also a question on the anti-money laundering and compliance officer, whether the person can be in charge of many other areas. I think, as Carlo mentioned, we look at whether there are good checks and balances to make sure there are no potential conflicts of interest for that individual. Because if the individual is in charge of finance as well as is the AML CFT compliance officer, there could be aspects that are best segregated and handled by someone else. And we would look at that and would have a discussion with the entity and pose questions on how that could be enhanced. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, David, for that intervention. I think this ties in, and we'll maybe in the interest of time move on to the next session. But I think just to reiterate exactly what David and Carlos have been saying, I think the Adaptation Fund does not prescribe the type of entity that can seek accreditation with the fund. The process is purely country-driven, which means going back to the earlier question of how the process actually happens in practice, it all starts with the designated authority, and the designated authority has to initiate the process by selecting a suitable NIE applicant to navigate the process. And suitable meaning, you know, it can at least meet the standard requirements as already explained by Carlos and what David was referring to. So there is no prescription on what entity, any entity, as long as it is suitable. And there is only the fast track currently is only applicable to GCF. So it's only between GCF and AF. I know Sylvia has responded to that already in the chat and provided further clarification on that. But currently it's only GCF and AF that happens. In the interest of time, maybe I'll call upon, since David, who's been speaking already, and David Kanja and John Fitzmorn, maybe if you can walk us through the strengthening AML CFT and providing the evidence base for that. So please, over to you.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, sorry, I can't get my camera to work either. But let me address one aspect of this. And there was a question in the comments about small entities, and I think that relates, I think, quite pertinently to sort of strengthening documentation. So I think it'll be helpful for entities to think of AML CFT as part of their risk management. So it's obviously one type of risk that the entity needs to manage, whether it's a large organization or a small organization, and depending on what type of organization it has. So what it boils down to is, does the entity have reasonable controls to ensure that it's not inadvertently funding individuals or other entities engaged in criminal activities or engaged in terrorist activities? There's also an element, and it's probably more pertinent for, say, NGOs than, say, for government departments, which is sources of funding. So are they managing the risks that money coming into the organization from contributors, can they verify that that's not coming from individuals or entities who may be sanctioned either nationally or internationally for either criminal activities or terrorism or proliferation regimes? So if you look at it from that point of view, if you're a government entity, I think, as David and Carlo has mentioned, you're probably already subject to government-wide policies and systems. And sometimes the evidence that you provide to us will be an explanation of how those systems apply, who was responsible, if you're using systems that may automatically, perhaps through the Ministry of Finance or the Treasury, be subject to automated checking. We need to have that explained so that we understand that context. But if you're, say, a standalone entity with your own systems, you may need to show that, either you have manual or you have automated processes for checking, for screening, whether it's potential partners or vendors or ultimate beneficiaries where you're sending money are not on any either national or international, usually UN sanctions lists. So if you're a small entity, for instance, you may be still needing to be able to show that you're carrying out that risk assessment. You can explain what your sources of money and where it's going, and whether those risks require an elaborate system or a very basic system. So it's very difficult to prescribe, over a webinar what you need to have, but look at it from a risk management point of view. The other thing that I might mention, and then I'll pass to David, is that most countries, or pretty much every country these days, does have national anti-money laundering and CFT laws. Usually those laws are focused very much on financial institutions and other entities where money is being passed. It might be real estate, insurance, and so on. So unless you're a financial institution, you're not going to be necessarily named in those laws. But for instance, if you're conducting risk assessments and you're concerned about the sources or the disposition of funds passing through your system, that might mean engaging with, say, the Financial Intelligence Unit, which is usually established either in a central bank or a treasury function in the national governments, or via your financial institutions. So you still need to be prepared, regardless of what your situation is, to be able to explain it, and where you have systems that you need to implement yourself to document those. So let me stop there and I'll pass to David. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, John. Just to add another comment on the AML CFT principles that were described by Carlo. On many of those elements, we will be looking for evidence of implementation. So we will ask certain questions to get, to see that it's being well implemented. As an example, if you have policies and procedures related to AML CFT, those policies may mention certain positions, for example, an AML CFT compliance officer. And we might ask a question about, okay, who is this individual? When was the individual appointed? What's the background? What does the person do? And so forth. There we are looking for evidence of implementation. In terms of screening, I think as John mentioned, we'll follow up again to see how that is being implemented, which databases are being used. We might ask for screenshots of some aspects of screening, again, just to see that the implementation is being done well, and to get evidence of that. We may also ask for internal or external audit reports that have been done on the AML CFT system or other independent assessments, again, just to make sure that it's being well implemented. So as you develop evidence, you would need to provide us with the documents that were mentioned by Carlo, the policies and procedures, and any other frameworks that you have, and also evidence of implementation. And we will ask for, written evidence. We'll also have, when we have clarification meetings, we can discuss that evidence and so on. And if you want to ask us questions about options that could be used, we will also provide, we'll also discuss and provide advice, that you might find useful. And I think I'll also stop here and see whether there are any questions that we can respond to.
Thank you, David and John. Actually, there is a question. If an organization already has a comprehensive safeguarding policy that addresses all aspects of internal control, is it still necessary to maintain a separate AML CFT policy?
Okay, I can take it and maybe John can answer. It depends on what is in that safeguarding policy. I think when Carlo talked about the AML CFT principles that we look at, if they are very well covered there, then of course, we will be okay with that. But generally, because safeguarding and AML CFT are quite different, generally most organizations we come across have two separate policies. As I said, a policy could be embedded in another policy, and so long as all the elements are covered, we as a panel would be okay with that. And some of those aspects could be, as I said, could be covered in government policies, or could be covered in any umbrella policy that the organization operates in. So wherever it is, if the principles that Carlo described are well covered, then the panel would be okay with it. John, you have some comments on this?
No, I think you've covered it pretty well, David. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. So the floor is open. If you want to take the floor, please feel free to click on the hand icon. You can raise your hand. As you can see, so we have 3 members of the accreditation panel, and a few minutes for you to take advantage of their presence if you have any questions that you want to pose to them, or to Sylvia for that matter, on the overall process. If you wish to take the floor, feel free to raise your hand, or you can type in the chat as well. We have about 7-8 minutes before we wrap up, but the floor is open.
All right, there is a raised hand.
There is. Thank you, Jin Yang. Please go ahead. I do not see it immediately from my end, but please go ahead and unmute yourself, and you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. Here from Nación Natura, we are currently improving our AML CFT procedure manual, and we would like to streamline the process with automation wherever it's possible, like follow-up verification of our vendors, associates, or monthly verifications. In that regard, have you had any experience with screening tools or software that could fulfill this scenario for small NGOs like Natura?
John, you want to take that one?
I'll try. In terms of specific screening tools, no. We have had some cases of usually they're multilateral entities which have developed these bot type tools which check against UN sanctions lists, things like the United States OFAC list, UK equivalent. But I can't give you any specific information about tools that may be available off the shelf from vendors. There may be some. Thanks.
Okay, one aspect I can add, I've also seen situations where entities, in addition to using international databases, also use national and regional databases. Some governments have good databases that cover AML, CFT, and other issues, which can also be used for this purpose. But that's in addition to the international databases that John mentioned. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. There is a question in the chat. If an organization already has comprehensive safeguarding policies that address, or a policy that addresses all aspects of internal control, I think this question was answered already. The question is it still necessary to maintain a separate AML? But this is covered already. But there's another question is, what are the implications for an applicant that has established policies in place, but lacks a designated compliance function to oversee their implementation?
Okay, so a lot of organizations, when they set up an AML CFT policy, they also have a specific compliance officer, sometimes referred to as an AML CFT compliance officer or an AML CFT focal person. There's a name for it, someone who follows up on these aspects. So if that's, again, if that compliance function that is mentioned in the question covers all the aspects that this very specific compliance officer covers, and covers it satisfactorily according to the principles that Carlo mentioned, then the panel would look at it and also look at the checks and balances related to that function. And if the situation looks effective, then the panel will be okay with it. Again, we are not specific on what exactly, how the policy should look like or how the compliance function should look like, but we would want the principles that were mentioned by Carlo to be met in a satisfactory manner, whatever arrangements the entity has. And if they are met in a satisfactory manner, then the panel would be okay with it.
Maybe I can also jump in here a little bit. It also depends on the type of entity. So, for example, if your entity is a financial institution, say a national development bank or some similar type of entity, most likely you will be subject to national AML CFT laws, which require you to set up a compliance function. So you'll need to be familiar with those requirements and comply with those requirements. And generally for those type of entities, compliance is a major undertaking because you're obviously, as a financial institution, dealing with a lot of third parties in terms of flows of funds. And so generally that compliance function tends to be a standalone function. Now, if you're not a financial institution, say you're a small entity, we may not expect that the person designated as the focal point or the compliance officer be a full-time position. It may be an existing staff member located in some sort of suitable part of the organization that amongst their duties is to oversee and monitor the operation of the AML CFT policies. They may be the focal point for people who have questions about the requirements. They can go to internally to get those questions answered. And they may be the person that if there needs to be an interface with either the financial institutions or with, say, government anti-money laundering functions, they're the person that's engaged with that. So I think there was an earlier question about could that be in procurement or finance? It could be. It just depends. As long as the segregation of duties is not violated. Sometimes it's with the legal office in an institution, but it's usually best placed with someone who understands the procurement and financial systems, because those are the systems where AML CFT issues are, I guess, are most prominent. So I don't know. Let me add that to the information that you're probably already overwhelmed with. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, John. I think we are almost at time. And thank you to all the panel members and Sylvia and the speakers. There is I think it's more of a comment in the chat from NetFund. And I think it's a comment about the hiring an ERP to ensure, I think, compliance and implementation of their AML CFT. And they're asking if other implementing entities or people on the joined into this webinar have any experience in terms of hiring an ERP, the costs associated with that, and meeting the AML CFT requirements. And just to comment that this is something we encourage implementing entities to cross-learn from each other and interact and engage. So please feel free to reach out to each other, not just to NetFund. Sometimes it helps discussing and learning from the experience of others who've gone before, how they are handling issues related to accreditation and reaccreditation. In a nutshell, I think what I'm getting from the panel with regards to AML, CFT, and indeed beyond that concerning the accreditation process for the adaptation fund and reaccreditation is that the panel is not necessarily rigid on criteria and does not really say this is exact, a must that you have to follow step A, B, C, but it is more about the entity and you being able to demonstrate evidence and demonstrate how your specific entity and your context is able, and your specific setup is able to meet the criteria and the standard. So providing that evidence based on your context and your scenario and demonstrating that. And they will be looking at that and then they'll assess and provide feedback. So please proceed with that thinking or mindset. The Secretariat, again, I reiterate, we are very open to engagement, communication. Please feel free to reach out to us. And please feel free also, I think one of the major feedbacks from the panel is that entities sometimes go quiet. Please remember that accreditation, reaccreditation remains a country-driven process. And the entities should really be proactive in reaching out to the panel, reaching out to the Secretariat, and the onus is on you as a country-led process and to take ownership of the process and reach out to us as many times as you deem necessary. We have an open door policy. And that approach will ensure that your process moves along much faster and that there's continued engagement and communication with you. With that, I think we had time. I don't know, Sylvia, if you have any last words before we close out, but thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you, Farai. Thank you all. And I see that already some has expressed that they found this webinar useful. So we will ensure that you have the presentations and hopefully we can have other webinars with the panel on all the matters with regard to the accreditation process. Thank you very much for the panel to be here, but thank you very much to all for the interest you have demonstrated, and we continue to be here to receive any questions that we can also pass back to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. And indeed, the presentations and the recording will be available on the Adaptation Fund website. They should be available by tomorrow or the day after. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a good day, good evening, and goodbye. And thank you to the panel speakers, the interpreters, the team from the Secretariat behind the scenes. Wish you a pleasant remainder of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.